Recently, Five Nights at Freddy's celebrated its 10th anniversary. In my case, as someone who's been following the games ever since the very beginning, I was 12 years old then, and I'm 22 now. That's pretty insane. The series means a lot of things to a lot of people. To some, it's the worst thing ever made, but to others, it's the greatest invention in modern history. Personally, I lie somewhere in between, but regardless of your current opinion on the franchise or the community surrounding it, there's no denying its cultural influence and lasting impact have been immeasurable. And it all started with the lightning in a bottle we know as the original Five Nights at Freddy's. Looking back from where we are now, I can't help but wonder, how did this happen? To answer that question, I want to take a look at Five Nights at Freddy's and try to dissect what exactly made the original game work as well as it did, and why its popularity soared to the heights it sees itself at today. With all that said, my name is Minaxa, and today I'm gonna tell you why Five Nights at Freddy's was a perfect storm. In order to understand what made FNAF work, we first need to look back at what the developer was doing before it, and what the video game scene and internet were like at the time. By this point, you've certainly heard the story a million times. Scott Cawthon, struggling indie developer, spent years releasing title after title to mixed success. He was a genuinely amazing artist and was capable of making some games that were actually pretty fun, but unfortunately, none of them clicked with a larger audience. Upon submitting one of his games, Chipper & Sons Lumber Co., to be greenlit on Steam, he was met with many harsh criticisms, claiming that the stiff animation and 3D models of his characters made them come off as unintentionally creepy, robotic, and unappealing.
This is a trailer for Chipper & Sons Lumber Company on Steam Greenlight. You may notice the dead, terrifying, soulless eyes of the background characters. That's a signature of Chip and whatever the fuck it was called, Chipper & Sons. It's just all over the fucking place, and that thing looks like it's gonna kill your children.
He could have easily let this game be the nail in the coffin, ending his career as a game dev right there. In fact, he heavily considered it, as he was extremely depressed following the negative reception to the game. But he didn't let it destroy him completely. At rock bottom, he could only go up. And eventually, he was inspired by that criticism that likened his characters to robots. And as you all know, this was the catalyst for Five Nights at Freddy's. Outside of Scott's personal situation, we also need to take a peek at what horror games were like before the release of Five Nights at Freddy's. Some of the most notable horror games of the era were Slender, Outlast, Amnesia, just to name a few. These games are all great in their own right, but they all have one thing in common. You either directly fight the thing that's scary, or you run away from the thing that's scary. There's nothing wrong with this, but part of why I think FNAF was so immediately appealing is because it kind of throws that formula out of the window. On top of that, the game boasted a low price tag, could run on pretty much anything, and had a simple and intuitive gameplay loop. I personally believe its release was also very well timed with what I'd call the golden age of commentary-based gaming content on YouTube, with millions of people eventually being exposed to the game through Markiplier alone, myself included. This doesn't even consider the dozens of other massive content creators who played the game at its release, and I firmly believe this is the primary way through which most people learned about Five Nights at Freddy's. After that, it was word of mouth amongst people who had watched others play it, Skype groups, at school, on internet forums. The game spread fast. But as we all know, even if a game goes viral overnight, that's not necessarily indicative of how good the game is. The real judge of its quality is, of course, gonna be the game itself. Five Nights at Freddy's. The title on its own sets up the basic premise. You're gonna spend 5, 6, 7 nights at some place named Freddy's, and this place involves animatronic mascots. Cool. Combined with the music and visuals, this incredibly simple title screen effectively conveys the tone a new player should expect going into the game. It's scary. The tone is scary. To set the tone even further, once you start a new game, a newspaper shows up to clarify what exactly it is that you'll be doing. It says, "Help wanted, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Family pizzeria looking for a security guard to work the night shift, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. Monitor cameras, ensure safety of equipment and animatronic characters. Not responsible for injury or dismemberment. $120 a week." Oh boy. Now that the expectations are set, we can go into night 1. The first night acts as the tutorial of sorts, with the phone guy we all know and love offering a bit of advice in the form of a pre-recorded message. I could sit here and talk for a while about how well put together the writing of these phone calls are from a horror and game design perspective, but I don't think it's necessary. But one thing I rarely hear people bring up is how funny the phone calls are. I mean, we've got lines like,
"The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at night."
And I think the reason why these phone calls are so funny is because of the contrast between the light-hearted tone of this veteran employee telling you about company negligence and how these robots are trying to kill you, and your only defense against them are 2 doors, 2 lights, a camera system, and a hilariously limited resource that dictates whether they even work at all. Great.
But hey, first station of the breeze. I'll chat with you tomorrow. Check those cameras and remember to close the doors only if absolutely necessary. Gotta conserve power. Alright, good night.
And once the phone call ends, the player is on their own. Now, truthfully, the first night is pretty uneventful. In fact, it's generally possible to just sit there and do nothing and you'll win. But a new player wouldn't know that. Once the animatronics start moving, they might panic and frantically search the cameras to find out where they went. This, of course, wastes your power. If the power goes down too quickly, or if they're using too much of it, they might panic even more. The game is designed to send you into an infinite panic loop. And the funniest part is, where the animatronics are doesn't even actually matter, as long as you know when they're outside your door. But once again, a new player just wouldn't know that. They don't know anything except for what they've been told. This deceptively simple gameplay formula, based on limiting the amount of information the player receives, perfectly nurtures the most crucial characteristic of good horror: fear of the unknown. This infinite panic loop the game wants you to fall into can lead to one of 3 outcomes. The first option is, of course, stop panicking and rationally approach your survival from a resource management perspective. That's how you win the game. The second option is to get so lost in your panic that you don't even notice when something sneaks right past your defenses and into your office. The third option, the most terrifying option, is running out of power. Losing all of your power comes from a bunch of conscious decisions the player had to make over the course of the night. It could be some optimization you chose not to make, a misunderstanding of an animatronic's position, letting Foxy hit your door one too many times, or a number of different scenarios. You might not even realize at the time of a mistake that you've done anything wrong. But once the power gets low, that dread that precedes the blackout, knowing that you could have done better but didn't, knowing that it's your fault, that is amazing horror. But what happens now that the power is off? The game gives you a second to think about the possibilities in the dark, until he shows up. And you know the rest. Another thing I really like is the clock. Scott could have easily just put an analog clock in the office that gives you a precise read on what time it is, but the thing is, he didn't. He put the clock on the HUD and made it only tick up by an hour at a time. It's not precise at all. This might seem like a minor detail, but it means you don't ever know what exactly the time is, only approximately what time it is. Once it gets to 5 AM, every second feels like a minute as you agonizingly wait for the clock to strike 6. This added tension works really well combined with the existing tension from managing your power, and it's especially tense when you fail to manage your power and it goes out at 5 AM. By that point, you have no clue exactly how close you are to finishing the night. You might win or you might lose. You're left to the mercy of the game. As the nights progress, you naturally learn more about how the game works, like how Bonnie approaches from the left, Chica from the right, Foxy sprints down the hall on your left, and by the start of night 3, you are probably feeling like you're finally starting to get the hang of it. Until Freddy starts moving. He hides from the camera as he approaches the office, making it hard to identify where he is, and every time he moves, he laughs, almost as if he's taunting you. Once he actually gets to the office, he doesn't even show up at the door first like Bonnie and Chica do, he just comes in. Freddy is specifically designed to throw a wrench into your understanding of the game and completely shatter any sense of knowing what's going on that you might have thought that you had. It makes you panic all over again, and I think that's pretty damn cool game design. Moving on to night 4, we get one last phone call from Phone Guy.
I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there. You know. Oh no.
And he dies at the hands of the animatronics. From a storytelling perspective, this is terrifying because he was supposed to be the veteran giving you advice. If he can't even survive, what does that mean for you? Now you're really on your own. But by that point, you're probably not as afraid of the unknown or the game in general anyways, since a lot of the unknown is known by this point. The nights are getting harder and harder, enough to the point where the challenge of the game begins to kind of overtake being scared by it. Nights 5 and 6 are where the difficulty reaches its peak, unless you do the custom night, and with that, you get paid, and that's it. The game ends. Of course, as scary as the gameplay may be designed to be, none of that would matter if the atmosphere was underwhelming. And I'm sure many people would agree with me when I say Five Nights at Freddy's does atmosphere extremely well. The game takes place in a rundown 90s kids pizzeria that honestly looks so decrepit that it's a miracle the place is still in business. The setting is meant to give you nostalgia for places like Chuck E. Cheese and Showbiz Pizza that utilized these same mascot characters to appeal to kids. I think turning a place that's meant for children into a horror game setting really creates this contrast between expectation and reality that amplifies how off everything feels. And that might sound like a really dumb and tired thing to say right now, but you gotta remember, Five Nights at Freddy's kind of pioneered this, and many games since have followed in the wake to varying degrees of success trying to replicate this atmosphere, which just goes to show how well it worked. I also want to dedicate a brief moment to discuss the animatronic designs. It's easy to forget about the original characters with how many dozens upon dozens there are in the franchise now, but these original designs, they're simple, they have distinguishable silhouettes, unique colors and features per character. It's genuinely impressive how good they are when you take a second to dwell on them. Moving on to the sound design, I mean, I don't even have to say how good the sound design is, just listen. You all know it, you've all heard it, this is the FNAF 1 ambience, and it's peak. But honestly, that isn't what I like most about the sound design. What I really like is all the little things you hear, like Foxy humming, the sound of the carousel, Chica banging pots in the kitchen, the buzzing of the desk fan across from you. The miscellaneous sounds are what really sell the atmosphere. Most of these sounds seldom mean anything, they're purely superficial. But once again, a new player doesn't know that. In an environment this tense and unnerving, any little sound you hear will make you question if something's about to happen or if you might have done something wrong. Obviously, there's no way I can mention the sound design without talking about the jump scare and the Toreador march. Both of these are so unbelievably iconic, they are probably the sounds most universally associated with Five Nights at Freddy's as a whole. With regards to the Toreador march, Scott could have just made it so that Freddy just jumps out at you after the power goes out. In fact, that's probably what the average player expects going into their first blackout. But instead, he took it an extra step up and made Freddy walk up to your door and start playing a happy-sounding music box song. Once again, we have that contrast I talked about earlier, juxtaposing joyful music with a creepy, off-putting atmosphere and the obvious sense of looming death is how you make something feel scary. It builds tension, resulting in an experience that's way better, or worse, than if Freddy were to just straight up jump scare you. I don't think there's much to say about the jump scare noise itself, though I find it very funny that such a non-robotic scream could come from an animatronic. Though, all things considered, that really shouldn't be all that surprising. By this point, I think I've made a pretty clear-cut case as to why Five Nights at Freddy's worked so well. It's simply a genuinely well-designed piece of horror. But a game being well put together isn't all that it needs to blow up and maintain its popularity after the fact. I won't deny that the game being good is a crucial factor, of course it is, but what you really need is some kind of unique charm that it brings to the table that nothing else has. Something that has people dying for more. For Five Nights at Freddy's, that was the lore. Throughout the game, there are many secrets and Easter eggs alluding to a case of 5 missing children. Naturally, this being a kids' restaurant, the idea of 5 kids going missing is pretty upsetting, but also intriguing. Between the secret posters, Phone Guy's mention of a bite of 87, random text that says "it's me" and a rare secret 5th character, the stage was set for a story that was, for better or for worse, much deeper than we could have ever imagined at the time. The real reason why Five Nights at Freddy's took off was the speed at which Scott was able to produce more games and in turn deliver more on the story he hooked people with. He made games so fast, it didn't even have time to die, which is a genuinely extremely impressive feat many have tried and failed to reproduce. Every time a new game was in the works, he'd release teasers on his website, keeping the hype alive and uniting the community in efforts to make new theories about what they might mean. The phenomenon was so awesome that I already have a whole video talking about it. Every time a new game came out, people were eager to confirm or deny theories that they had over the story, and a lot of the time our understanding would be completely upended by a new release. And this still happens to this day. But he never satisfied them completely. After all, if we just knew the entire story of Five Nights at Freddy's, wouldn't that be kind of boring? Isn't it more fun to try and figure it out yourself? I remember when Five Nights at Freddy's was just one game. One game I played on my iPad at a restaurant. One game I talked to friends at school about when teasers for FNAF 2 started. One game I watched countless hours of MatPat and Freddy Grumpy Bear and Dawko theories on. One game that I've watched Markiplier play at least 5 times through. And now, look how far we've come. The community has managed to substantiate a dozen full games, multiple spin-offs, novels, an ongoing series of movie adaptations, and most importantly, thousands of fan projects, including games, music, fan art, fan fiction, entire short films, and infinitely more. None of this would have been possible without the community that was there to support the games when they came out, to uncover the secrets they were hiding, and explore everything they had to offer. None of it would have been possible without you and me. No matter how you feel about Five Nights at Freddy's, I think that's pretty goddamn cool. And that's the end of the video, shorter one than usual. I apologize for being kinda late to the party with an anniversary video. I was busy moving and I got distracted by other projects, etc, etc. But I do want to express that I won't be making as much FNAF content as I used to, since the new stuff really just doesn't pique my interest, which I'm sure is a sentiment many of you share. But if you like the style of my videos, if you like the way I write, the way that I narrate, consider sticking around. There's plenty more to come. That being said, that's gonna be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time. And most importantly, thousands of... Bro.